With the rise of indie games over the past decade, many developers that grew up playing video games have looked back to the past for inspiration. This in and of itself is nothing new. But what if you were to go beyond simply working within this style, and instead embrace the technology of the 90s as well? This is the foundation on which Ion Fury is built, a brand new shooter from 3D Realms and Voidpoint that aims to continue the legacy started with games such as Duke Nukem 3D and Shadow Warrior. This is in many ways the antithesis to the cinematic scripted shooter that would become popular in the wake of Half-Life. But rather than retreading well-worn ground, Ion Fury feels like a proper evolution of the formula. Like Duke Nukem 3D before it, Ion Fury was crafted using the original build engine, and by utilizing the same technology as these classic games, the developers have crafted something that feels wholly authentic. Thus today we're going to explore just what makes Ion Fury such a great game, both from a gameplay standpoint and a technology one. So, gear up and let's get started. Drenched in atmosphere, Ion Fury drops the player into a towering metropolis above the clouds. A light drizzle pierces the thick air as neon signs flicker in the distance. Welcome to the future, viewed through a lens forged in 1996. And if you were playing games during this era, you will no doubt remember the great 1996 shootout between id Software's Quake and 3D Realms' Duke Nukem 3D. Both games offer a suitably 90s style experience with a focus on keycards, complex map design, and fast shooting. But the underlying presentation varies drastically. Quake introduced the world to real-time 3D polygonal graphics and dynamic lighting in a first-person shooter. It was a true next-generation showpiece. Duke Nukem 3D, on the other hand, used Ken Silverman's build engine to push interactivity and scale to the next level. Sure, it relies on 2D sprite objects and sector-based map design versus Quake's polygonal graphics, but Duke managed to deliver a convincingly detailed world packed with new features around every corner. From working security cameras, functional pool tables, working light switches, and loads of breakable objects, Duke felt fresh and fun. Yet that sense of fun has been lost as the genre continued to change to meet the needs of the day. Thus, in creating Ion Fury, the team looked to the past. This is effectively the sequel 3D Realms fans have been waiting for since the late 90s. Ion Fury is a special project, and it kickstarts the beginning of an initiative at 3D Realms to create new games using old technology. The team at Voidpoint then is largely born from the community, fans that have spent years working with the build engine that also understand what makes shooters from this era so memorable. The key lies in constraint. There's been a lot said in the art world regarding the power of simplicity and constraint. By limiting your palette, the scope narrows. You no longer have infinite colors or shapes. Instead, creativity blossoms as you find new ways to utilize what you do have to create something special. In this case, the build engine has hard limits in terms of sprite resolution, available colors, map size, and more. And while this is a modified version of the build engine based on the source port eDuke32, it still shares these limitations. While the team makes use of modern tools such as Adobe Photoshop and Visual Studio, the core map editor used to design the game worlds is deeply rooted in the original map editor used to create Duke Nukem 3D. This is key to the project. Having used Mapster 32 myself, I'm in awe at the quality of the map design on display, both in terms of the actual level layout and pacing, as well as the visual design. Each scene features a wide range of carefully crafted shapes and designs. While there are restrictions, of course, on the construction of the world itself, Build does allow for sectors to overlap other sectors. Think non-Euclidean geometry. You can create fantastical maps that do not necessarily adhere to real-world space, but you can do true rooms above rooms as well. Back in 1996, the build engine was more advanced in terms of what could be achieved in a game world compared to, say, id Tech 1, which powered Doom. And Ion Fury does push things further than ever, but it's still hugely limited compared to modern engines. As a result, the maps have a different feel from most other modern games, and I think that's a good thing. There are of course limitations in terms of overall map size, but this highlights another clever solution. Each map is broken up into smaller map chunks, with a brief loading screen between them. Check this out. We finish up this piece here while moving down the hallway. Right as you go around the corner, however, you'll notice that a very short load time occurs, and then we're in the next map. It's still part of the overall zone, which is what the game breaks its levels up into, but it is a different map technically. This approach basically allows the developers to go beyond the size limitations of the original build engine, delivering these huge, complex maps in the process. Also keep in mind that while this is an older engine, the increase in modern computing power means that the team can push level complexity further than any previous build engine games. There's no need to support, say, a 486 processor here. Another defining feature then is the artwork itself, which is designed within an 8-bit color palette, with a heavy reliance on lookup tables, which essentially allows you to swap colors within the assets to give the impression of greater variety. This was of course used in Duke Nukem 3D and other build engine games as well, and it is used here. Techniques like this can also be used to give the impression of light sourcing and shadows. Now this is not a real-time shadow obviously, but breaking up the sector and changing the properties of each chunk can allow you to mimic the look of long shadows cast across the scene. Duke Nukem 3D already does this, but Ion Fury goes much further with a huge focus on these shadows. Again, this is just another example of working within a limited palette. There are no real-time lighting and shadow tools in this engine as there are in modern engines such as Unreal, but the developers did find ways to give the same impression in a scene. The quality of the assets created for this game cannot be understated either. By designing within a limited color palette, the results appear supremely authentic, but it's clear that the artists have applied years of knowledge and experience to the creation, resulting in textures and sprites that are more attractive than anything you would have seen in previous build engine games. Much like eDuke 32 then, Ion Fury offers support for higher resolutions and wider aspect ratios, not to mention higher frame rates. The base artwork of things such as enemies and weapon sprites, though, target a resolution 4 times that of Duke Nukem 3D. If you remember, Duke 3D by default runs at 320 by 200, though you can select higher resolutions than this, but the core artwork such as the hand and pistol that you use by default is designed for a 320 by 200 display. Ion Fury, however, targets essentially 640 by 480, so you still get that pixel art aesthetic from the artwork itself, but it is much higher resolution than the games of the past. More importantly, Ion Fury now features voxelized items, and they are used everywhere. When we first examined the game last year, back when it was known as Ion Maiden, this was a feature that was lacking, and we were told that this was due in part to the difficulty in finding an artist that could create objects in this way. Thankfully, it seems that someone has indeed stepped up to the task, and the result is perhaps the most ambitious implementation we've seen in a game like this. Everything from bar stools to barrels to large mounted turrets and more are displayed using voxels rather than a simple flat piece of artwork. Keep in mind that it's not possible to model objects in 3D and arbitrarily place them within the game world in a build engine title. That's why you see things like this black space beneath the parked vehicles. It's built using the same method as the rest of the scene. Voxels, however, allow for more nuanced, complex items to be featured in the game, such as this spinning weapon here, that also mesh well with the rest of the artwork. It's basically 3D pixel art, and it looks fantastic. And that's what's so interesting about the visuals and the level design as a whole. It just feels authentic in a way that retro-inspired shooters built in Unity and Unreal really never do. And that extends to the available renders as well. By default, the game uses OpenGL, as you might expect, but you can choose to run it entirely in software mode, just like back in the day. This restores the view warping of the original build games, while delivering a slightly grittier overall look, I suppose. The downside is that it becomes much more difficult to run the game at higher resolutions without aid from your GPU. Another key feature in any build engine game is the prevalence of interactive objects, basically superfluous bits and bobs that respond to player input. This includes things like working security cameras, functional mirrors, vending machines that disperse refreshment, flushable urinals, light switches, and a whole lot more. It's a small detail, but an important one. Beyond that, I also enjoy the little touches that pop up throughout the game, like this homage to the blackout hallway in the original Unreal. Or this bitchin' fast laptop, a nice callback to the bitchin' fast 3D 2000. Or stuff like this as well, I suppose. Yeah, it's packed full of weird little posters and gags, which honestly is just part of what you expect from a 3D Realms game. Hopefully by now you're starting to understand just what makes this such a unique and impressive game. But of course, there's more. In addition to its impressive use of the build engine, Ion Fury is also the first build title to use tracker music. Prior to this, build games relied either on MIDI or Redbook audio played from a CD. To put it very simply, tracker music relies instead on sound samples assembled onto a timeline with the musician to create some amazing sounding tunes. It's a format that's been around since the 80s and really took off on the Amiga. Ion Fury then uses the libxmp Lite open source library to handle tracker playback. This has been integrated into the game, and honestly, it sounds amazing. The sound effects and voice clips are also suitably punchy. I mean, just listen to the pistol. Not to mention the one-liners Shelly spouts off like Duke and Lo Wang before her. It works brilliantly.
Talk shit, get shumped. Clean up on aisle your ass.
So yeah, the look and sound of Ion Fury is just perfect. But thankfully, there's a lot more to this game than an authentic presentation. It also plays like a dream. This was developed by people that truly understand what makes a great classic shooter work. Now, when I talk about retro-style first-person shooters, I'm really referring to a specific style of design. Essentially, games from this era typically present large, increasingly complex maps to the player. The objective is to reach the end, of course, but it's never so simple. Along the way, you'll face hordes of enemies, keycard locked doors, and even puzzles. It's never just a straight shot to the end. So let's look at a very basic example from Ion Fury then. At one point in the game, after infiltrating the villain's high-rise office building, you make your way to this elevator. On the way up, however, the elevator is disabled. So now you're left to explore an entire floor of this office building with one objective: get the elevator back online. Your first task, of course, is to take out a group of enemies, but once you've dispatched your foes, you can begin to explore. You'll quickly discover that there's loads of objects, items, and weapons just scattered all about this office. It really is sort of an interesting place to look around. But eventually you'll stumble upon a door like this, which is locked. So look around and you might find a switch to open it. Once inside, however, you'll quickly encounter another set of enemies and a locked door requiring a red keycard. At this point, you should be starting to piece together the office layout while dispatching enemies. But eventually you'll stumble into an office with a red card waiting for you. More enemies then swarm the scene and a new passage opens up. It's completely optional, of course, but look around and you might find a secret stash. Each level is packed with secret areas, by the way, and they're often rather difficult to find. From this point then, you make your way back to the red door, where you run inside, and you'll quickly find an office guarded by auto turrets. dispatch them, and you'll be able to free the elevator. Now you need to make your way back through the office while dispatching enemies along the way before eventually continuing upwards. This is a very simple example, but as you see, it offers a space to play in rather than a series of linear corridors, and that's key. Ion Fury offers more of a world designed to facilitate both combat and actual exploration, and with a focus on keycard retrieval and puzzle solving, you'll spend a lot of time exploring each level while learning the layout. It all works in tandem to activate that part of your brain that feels satisfaction from learning new things. The sense of discovery while engaging in combat combined with the awesome music and visuals just works perfectly. Now in comparison, a modern campaign like those in, say, Call of Duty are usually completely linear. You move forward, firing at targets as you go. You're rarely left to figure out where to go next. The focus is always on a cinematic presentation and shooting. You never really feel a connection to the environment as a result. It's just a mindless set piece, really. And to me, that's what makes the old school approach so appealing. It rewards and demands exploration from the player. And despite the primitive visuals, as I've noted, you wind up feeling more attached to the game world as a result of the exploration required. This is effectively the same formula that id utilized when making Doom 2016. id understands what makes a classic shooter so engaging, and so does Voidpoint. Then there's the combat itself. So firefights tend to vary greatly in terms of range. It's never just distant enemies or close quarters. It's this satisfying combination of both, and everything in between, of course. There's no recharging health here either, so you need to stay on your toes, dodging enemies, while taking them out as efficiently as possible. All of these things contribute to that cycle of engagement. Punchy visuals, audio, brilliant level design, and excellent combat all work in tandem to deliver a truly memorable experience. And truthfully, this is one of the finest shooters I've ever played. So where can you play Ion Fury, and what kind of performance can you expect? Well, for the moment the game is available only on PC, but there are console versions in the works. I'll be especially curious to see how this old technology runs on those systems. Duke Nukem 3D received a port to various modern systems, but it's a more simplistic game, and even then there were a few issues. On the PC side though, I'm also happy to report significant improvements to performance since last year's early access build. When it was first released, performance, even on a fast PC, simply wasn't good enough, and larger areas really dropped frames, as you can see. In the final game, however, everything is much more optimized, and I had little trouble reaching a stable frame rate. That said, it's not perfect. There were a couple points where the game would randomly start to drop frames for no obvious reason. By entering the options menu, changing this setting, then changing it back, the performance was restored. It's a minor issue that didn't crop up often, but it is annoying nonetheless, and it's something you should know. So I think by this point you can tell that I'm a fan. This is the type of game that I just can't get enough of. Games that respect and draw from the past while introducing modern improvements. It's a perfect fusion of old and new, and it works. If you've ever found yourself pining for the old days of Doom, Quake, Duke Nukem 3D, Shadow Warrior, Blood, and the like, this is a must-play. I really can't recommend it enough. But that's it for the moment. If you enjoyed this video, as always, be sure to like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and of course, find us over on Twitter. And until next time, this is John, signing off.